Hello and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're taking a really close look at a word we hear absolutely every single day, yet we almost never stop to actually define it. That word is professionalism. Think about it. Is it just showing up in a nice suit, replying to your emails on time, or is it something much, much deeper? To demystify this incredibly vague buzzword, we're diving into a fascinating 2008 paper by legal scholar Neil Hamilton. We're going to explore the hidden agreements that govern society's experts and unpack the actual psychology of how a professional mind works.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want to frame our entire explainer today around this one foundational moral question. What do we owe others? Whenever we talk about doctors, lawyers, accountants, or academics, essentially the people who hold immense power and expertise in our society, this is the exact question that sits at the very heart of their relationship with the public. Here is the quick macro to micro journey we are taking today. 1. The professional social contract. 2. Losing the public's trust. 3. The definitional crisis. 4. 5 elements of professionalism. And 5. The psychology of conscience. Let's start with part 1. The professional social contract, or the hidden deal between experts and society. You see, professionalism isn't just a set of HR rules slapped on a break room wall. It's actually a high-stakes 125-year-old tacit agreement between peer review professions and the general public. And this brilliantly illustrates how much of a two-way street it really is. Society essentially grants these professions a monopoly, giving them autonomy, exclusive jurisdiction, and massive control over their own work. In exchange, the professions promise to maintain high standards of competence, to discipline their own members, and above all, to restrain their own self-interest to serve the public good. In Hamilton's analysis, the public grants these professions the unique ability to regulate themselves through peer review. And you might be wondering why. Well, because the work of a doctor or a lawyer involves incredibly complex, highly specialized knowledge. The public trusts that only peers within that specific profession truly understand the nuances of those difficult judgment calls, and therefore only they can properly evaluate who should even enter the profession and how they should behave. This quote from sociologist Elliot Friedson really drives the point home. There is this massive underlying tension between our dominant market competition ideology, which, is all about producing services at the lowest possible cost to maximize profit, and the ideology of professionalism. It's radically different from normal corporate consumerism. Professionalism says that certain jobs protect transcendent values, things like justice and physical health. Because those values are absolutely critical to a functioning society, we literally can't just leave them to the ruthless forces of the free market. The professionals themselves must be in control. Which brings us to part 2, losing the public's trust and the threat of the market. So, what happens when professionals break that promise? Well, the social contract isn't permanent, and when self-interest wins out, the public reacts swiftly. Just look at the real-world consequences here. Following the massive Arthur Andersen and Enron scandal, the public realized the accounting profession had completely failed as an independent gatekeeper. So Congress stepped right in with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, stripping away significant peer review autonomy from accountants. Suddenly, lawyers faced new SEC federal regulations, forcing them to report misconduct. In medicine, we've seen a huge shift toward managed care organizations and strict oversight, which heavily reduces a doctor's autonomy. And in academia, governing boards are reacting to perceived failures by shifting heavily toward contingent, non-tenured faculty. So the crucial point is this. The social contract is always up for renegotiation. As public confidence in an expert class falls, the public drastically reduces that profession's control over its own work. They essentially pull them back into a typical, tightly managed employer-employee relationship governed by the market. Let's move on to part 3, the definitional crisis. Why can't we define professionalism? Why are professions losing their autonomy so quickly? Largely because they are terrible at clearly defining and defending what professionalism actually means in the first place. When professions try to defend their special autonomy to the public, their defense is often surprisingly weak. As Friedson points out, they tend to rely on a vague rhetoric of rights, job security, and, good intentions. But they rarely spell out the actual underlying principles of their institutions, which frankly makes the whole thing look incredibly self-interested to the average observer. Now, what's really interesting about this is how different fields attempt to solve this definitional crisis in radically different ways. If you look at the medical literature, organizations like the American Board of Internal Medicine try to focus their definition heavily on altruism, meaning maintaining the patient's interest above the physician's self-interest. But if you look at legal scholarship, scholars have completely failed to construct a widely accepted definition.
Instead, they often rely on what we might call post hoc horror stories, basically pointing out what went wrong instead of defining what should go right. Or they just treat the entire concept as totally self-evident, assuming everyone just intuitively knows what it means.
In fact, legal scholarship is deeply divided on this. Some assume professionalism is just ordinary morality. Others focus strictly on public service. And some scholars, like Monroe Friedman, completely dismiss professionalism as a misguided concept altogether. He actually argued that an emphasis on civility and courtesy might undermine a lawyer's primary duty to provide zealous advocacy for their client. It is a landscape of deep, deep confusion.
And that leads us to Part 4, 5 elements of professionalism and the ABA synthesis.
So how do we fix this confusion? We absolutely need a clear, actionable definition. Neil Hamilton provides a really concrete solution by synthesizing decades of reports from the American Bar Association into these 5 systematic elements. Number 1, continuous growth in personal conscience. Number 2, complying with the ethics of duty, meaning the absolute minimum standards and rules. Number 3, striving to realize the ethics of aspiration, which are the highest core ideals of the profession. Number 4, holding peers accountable. And number 5, agreeing to act as a fiduciary. Notice how this naturally builds from the internal self out to the minimum rules, up to high ideals, across to peers, and finally outwards to the public.
I want to pause here for a second on the crucial difference between the ethics of duty and the ethics of aspiration. Without clear guiding principles, professional education tends to focus exclusively on the minimum floor, just avoiding malpractice and not breaking the law. But think about it. If professionals are only taught how not to get sued, they have absolutely no tools to navigate the vast spectrum of complex, discretionary ethical judgments they're going to face every single day on the job.
And that is exactly why the 5th element, fiduciary duty, is so vital. This means a professional's self-interest must be fundamentally overbalanced by their devotion to serving the client and the public good. It requires engaging in continuous, active reflection over the course of an entire career about the relative importance of making money versus the importance of justice and public service. Finally, Part 5, the psychology of conscience. Let's look inside the professional mind.
Let's move to and see how this builds from that very first element we mentioned. Personal conscience. This is perhaps the most profound takeaway from Hamilton's research. Personal conscience is the absolute bedrock of the whole system. Without intense self-scrutiny, without taking the time to seek feedback and engage in real moral dialogue, an individual has no ethical foundation. And without that foundation, all those other elements, the rules, the peer accountability, the public service, they all just collapse into a calculus of simple self-interest. The so-called professional will just learn how to game the rules for their own advantage.
So how do we actually build that conscience? Well, moral psychology offers a fascinating cognitive journey called the 4-component model, developed by James Rest. Today, we're looking at the first 2 crucial steps of that model. Step 1 is moral sensitivity. This is basically the imaginative ability to be hyper-aware of how your potential actions will actually affect other people. Then, step 2 is moral reasoning and judgment. Once you clearly see those potential impacts, you have to actively deliberate and judge which line of action is actually morally justifiable. It's not passive, it's a continuous, active cognitive process. Which brings our narrative full circle, right back to the opening question of this explainer. What do we owe others? Ultimately, true professionalism isn't just about having specialized knowledge or gatekeeping exclusive rights. It is deeply rooted in the fundamental social condition that human beings live in groups, and the immense power wielded by experts inherently impacts the lives, the rights, and the well-being of everyone else in that group.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Whether you're a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, or a professional in literally any field, take a hard look at your own daily decisions. Is your self-interest truly overbalanced by your devotion to the public good? It's a really tough question, for sure, but it's the exact question that keeps the vital social contract of our society intact. Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer today. I really hope this structured look at professionalism has sparked your curiosity, and I cannot wait to explore more complex topics with you next time.